Good morning, everyone, and
Good
welcome back
morning.
to Adobe Live. My name is Howard Pinsky. What is
I'm
my
Ryan
title
Dumlao.
now?
Oh,
And that's Ryan Dumlao. I don't know what my title. I was trying to think of my. It changed a while ago, but hi, it's early. Ryan's not drinking coffee for some reason. I don't know what's wrong with
I'm
him.
jumping the gun.
But I'm Howard Pinsky. That is Ryan Dumlao, and great to see all of you. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, I don't see chat on my end just yet, but I'm going to refresh and see all your fancy little phrase. It's clearly very early, but hope you're all doing well. But I'm going to pass it over to Ryan to give a quick intro while I pull up the chat and probably drink some more coffee.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and wherever else you may be. I'm Ryan Dumlao. I'm the group product manager on Photoshop, specifically for Photoshop on mobile. So if you don't know, we've launched Photoshop on the iPhone back in February. And so that has been kind of my project in my life for the last couple of years. And that's what we've been leading to bring out to all of you. And we're really excited to talk about it today.
That is exciting. And seeing a few people trickle in the chat. Hey, Sean, great to see you. Hope you're doing well. And I'm excited to sit down with Ryan because as a longtime Photoshop user, I have been using Photoshop since I think 2.5. There was an outdated version on the computer in our school, and that was before layers, which is wild to even think about. But now we have on this thing, we have iPhone, Photoshop on iPhone, and I really want to dive into all the goodies today and talk about how that's even possible. Because as again, longtime Photoshop user, it doesn't even seem possible how
Yeah.
Photoshop is now on the phone. And we've had Photoshop apps on the iPhone before. We've had Photoshop Express, I think Photoshop Cut, I think something like that, and Fix. But this one feels a lot more like Photoshop. And Ryan, do you want to give a little bit of a breakdown of what Photoshop on iPhone is, who is it for, and anything else you might want to throw in there?
Yeah, I'll just give a little my own background. I've used Photoshop since version 3. Back when I was, I think, in third grade, my dad brought home a copy of it from his work. I remember the splash screen still. It had this little eye looking through a box, and it's been like very tightly in my life since then in very many different ways. I do photography. I do some other graphical design that I used to do in high school. I just do one-off things of editing images, but when I came to join Adobe, I had the opportunity to start working on Photoshop on the iPad. And it was already well underway. But the big thing there was the engineering team took a challenge and decided, can we put Photoshop somewhere else besides a desktop computer? And so they spent a couple of years to see like what you could do with the next generation of iPads that were coming out from Apple back in, I think this is 2018. And if you can get Photoshop running on iOS. And it turned out they could do it. And at the time, the iPad was the hardware that could really handle the power and the size of Photoshop. And so that's where we put a lot of our effort back then. We got Photoshop working on iOS as a proof of concept, and then figured out, okay, if we're putting this onto a tablet, how are we gonna make it work? How are we gonna fit all of the UI, the toolbar, and all that kind of stuff that's in Photoshop desktop onto an iPad? And it took a little while, but what we came out with was a different user interface that was really focused on touch on the screen in front of you and being able to access things really quickly without having to dig through menus. The other part too is because we're bringing it to a device that was mobile, like the iPad, had limited space, still a little bit limited power. We didn't bring the whole application over to the iPad. We have the ability to touch and type in or to tap into all the tools and functionality, and it is the same core engine as Photoshop Desktop. But we were very specific on the tools and features that we brought in. What would work when you're mobile? What would work when you're on the screen that has a touch screen? What would work for an iPad if you have an Apple Pencil? And so that is where we came out with a version of Photoshop on the iPad that had what we figured were really key workflows and capabilities that would work for you on that screen. So as soon as we launched Photoshop on the iPad, we got straight to work on where else can we bring this? Maybe it's the iPhone. And so we started looking at, since it was already on iOS, we started trying to get it work on the iPhone, and it did work. The iPhones at the time, this is again like 2019, 2020, we're still They're pretty powerful, but we had to do a lot of optimization just to get the technology to work really performantly on the iPhone, and also wait for Apple to bump up the specs of their hardware. But the other big challenge was, how do we actually get the user experience of Photoshop onto a phone? So if any of you are familiar with Photoshop on the iPad, we had a kind of a hybrid of what a touch interface would look like and Photoshop. So we still had a toolbar on the left, we had a layer stack on the right, but we left as much open space as possible to see the canvas. And we needed to do something similar on the iPhone because your screen is even smaller there and you're using your finger, so you have to touch everything. So at first, we kind of just shrunk the iPad UI to what would be the iPhone shape. So we still had a toolbar on the left, we still had a layer stack, and we had a lot of stuff in the bottom, all the tools and all the buttons there. But it didn't really jive with customers that were testing it out. They're trying to figure out, how do you learn Photoshop? How do you adjust to Photoshop on a phone? And so we actually kind of took a wrecking ball to that phone UI and redid everything. We realized that on the phone, you're trying to do everything with the, if you're holding your phone, actually hold my phone there. If you're holding your phone, then I'm everything here is on the bottom of my screen. My thumb's down here. I want to do everything with one hand, and so we try to make it as intuitive as possible. Where if I was, now that I'm showing the UI, everything here will be focused on the bottom of the screen, and it's also really more oriented towards workflows. So you see here in the UI, I don't have a toolbar anymore. I don't have a huge layer stack. I've got a little bit of layer stack here represented that I can scroll through, but my tools are actually all within the bottom here, and they're all organized by workflow. So if I want to go and make a selection, I start here, I'll make a selection, and then I'll be able to make a selection and then work on that selection. So if I select the sky here, I'm jumping a little early into my demo, I realize, but I want to just kind of show the philosophy of the UI. After that, you'll see that the whole bottom bar changes to contextually to what can you do with that selection. And that's a big part of the philosophy we've thought about bringing Photoshop to the iPhone, is this idea of select and do. Can you, if you can make a selection and then do something with that selection, then you can do a lot of things that are really considered pretty advanced Photoshop stuff. So if I
Yeah,
were
and I
to
feel
take this
that's
guy,
very
yeah,
important, especially for a mobile device, because if you look at Photoshop on desktop, and we hear this all the time from new Photoshop users, is there's a lot going on. There's menus
yes,
with a million items, there's a million different panels which can be all moved around and customized. There's different workspaces, there's tools within tools within tools, and I saw some people saying, well, why don't you just take Photoshop on the desktop and like
yeah.
put it on the iPad or put it on the phone? Like, do you really want to do that? You probably don't. And it sounds like from what you were saying, you kind of tried that at first or something similar, and users were like, no.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely get a lot of feedback saying, why can't you just port Photoshop desktop to my iPad or my iPhone? Why can't, where's my file menu? Where's every single feature and function in this application? And the thing about Photoshop, the beauty of Photoshop, is that it can do a million things, and you can do one thing a million ways. And so there's so much functionality in this 35-year-old program now that we've built up over the last couple decades, that really, when you look down at how people are using it now, or as people start to learn Photoshop today, what areas, what functions are they really focusing on and using and learning? We really centered on that. And so really the ideas of more advanced selections, being able to use masks really effectively, using non-destructive editing like adjustment layers and that kind of thing, those have been really our focus. Non-destructive editing is a big ethos for editing on Photoshop in general, but what we've brought it to mobile, like really trying to focus on, yes, you have your image, you have your layers, or actually you have your base image, but you want to be able to work on that without editing the original image. So being able to use layers, being able to use selections and adjustment layers has been really kind of the focus. And so as a result, we're also trying to make it less complex, less cumbersome, especially if you don't know Photoshop at all and you're picking up for the first time on the phone. That's really important too. Because if I come and I've never seen Photoshop and I open my image and this is what I see, it's a lot more understandable what I can do next, versus if I had all of our tools on the left, with all the icons and trying to pick through and understand what all those things are. We actually tried that, and we saw people didn't really know all the icons if they didn't know Photoshop. And so they would pick through and not know what was happening and then would get really frustrated. And so we really wanted to alleviate that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting conversation because, when you mention you want to, give people the power of selections and masking and also kind of teach them Photoshop, we had several discussions internally, once we got our hands on it. And, my gut reaction was, well, there should be like quick actions to like do something very quickly and then move on. But then you kind of pushed back and they're like, well, we want to also teach people about Photoshop or
Yeah.
Photoshop and selections and masking. And as I've started to use it, as I've started to talk with customers, that's probably the right decision because it's really about the non-destructiveness of Photoshop. That's what shines because there are a million applications on our phones these days that can edit photos and do something with a photo to make it look fancy or remove an object. But then you're left with a flat image. Whereas Photoshop, it's like everything's there. You've got your layers, adjustment layers. It's wild to me just seeing all of the information that's available. I was at my daughter's soccer practice not too long ago, and things were slow. She was on the bench or whatever, and I just pulled out my phone. I just started creating like a soccer-based social graphic
Yep.
on Photoshop, which is so cool. But I do want to ask you, because we've gotten this question a lot since Photoshop and iPhone launched. Who exactly is this for? Is it for the person who's been using Photoshop for 20 or 30 years, or is it for someone who's just getting into design who might be in high school or college or somewhere in between?
Yeah. So the person we had in mind when we were designing this user experience was actually someone who doesn't know Photoshop at all or very, very little experience. And because we found that people who are creating on their phones, well, there's a million other apps out there already, right? Like you said. So they're already using other apps to do image editing. They're also, if we look at, I would say like the next generation of creators, those who are really starting to learn how to do creative image editing are only using their phones these days. And so for us, the original, this kind of center target of who we're looking at is going to be someone who doesn't know Photoshop, who's picking it up for the first time on their phone. And in this case, because it's free, which is another big note I'd love to touch on, that anyone can open it up. And then we wanted to make sure that they see Photoshop and understand its concepts. The UI may be different from the desktop, but the way that you edit, the way that you do things, it's still the same approach. We want to teach people how to make selections. We want to teach people how to do masking, what a layer is. Those are for people who know Photoshop well, those seem like very simple things, really powerful things and things you just do kind of through muscle memory really fast. But the reality is to understand those concepts takes quite a bit of thought and time for a lot of people. Like I'll give an example myself. I didn't use masking really well or thoroughly until I joined Adobe. I just did everything destructively. I would select things and delete. I'd make a new layer and work on that layer and change things with
Oh, that
filters.
pains me, Ryan.
I know, I know. And I had used it for 20 years prior to that. So there's just different ways that we want people to understand what Photoshop is. And the important things for us is to get them to understand the concepts of how to edit in the Photoshop style. Because many other apps on the phones do editing differently, very differently. So that's one part of it. That was our focus on making sure someone who doesn't know Photoshop can open this up, kind of get oriented, really understand like what is this application, how do I get started. We have right now, I'm not a new user, I have not newly logged in. So when the first time you log in, you'll get some tips to say, hey, start a selection, make a selection. And then once you do that, then it'll tell you, okay, well, here are the things you can do with that selection. If you want to adjust it, if you want to make, if you want to do change the color, make it black and white. If you want to do generative fill, because we have that in here as well. If you want to add some other types of things like solid color layers, lots of stuff you can do with the application once you've made a selection. And so really, that's the thing for us is get people to learn first that concept of selections. Now, to your other point, Howard, what about people who really know Photoshop and come into this application? You're going to open it and say, hey, none of this looks familiar to me because where's my toolbar, all that kind of stuff. And I'll be honest, when we were first redesigning this application, because like I said, we did have a version of the app that had the iPad UI shrunk to the phone. So you did have tools on the left. and you did have your layer stack on the right. I I liked that as a experienced user for a while because I was really familiar with all the tools and the functionality. I had the muscle memory built in already to how to use it. But when we brought this to people who didn't know Photoshop, it was a little painful to see because people will tap around and really wouldn't know where to go with it. However, as I played with this more, as I tried to understand or really what the different functionalities of these workflows we've laid out do, as an experienced Photoshop user, I've become really comfortable with it. Like I understand what's going on when I do certain things. When I do a selection and I mask it off, and I'll just do that as an example here. If I make this selection on the sky and let's say I'll just add another adjustment layer here and I'll make it a different color. It actually is probably hidden under another layer. So, but I'll know what happened here. It created an adjustment layer. I can go to my full layer stack here and see, oh, this is what happened when I created that layer. I'll know what happened, and I'll very very gradually or quickly understand, okay, well, in this context on the phone, this is how these edits work. But really the core understanding of how Photoshop does editing and how it works is what's really important for us to get across to whoever's using the application.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was just taking some notes. But I did have so while you're on this screen, speaking of feedback, because I'm sure now that it's launched into the world, I'm sure you guys are getting a ton of different feedback from all sorts of different users.
Yeah.
And for me in particular, now that I have you here, I'm just going to throw some feedback at you. When you added that adjustment layer, I think it was a hue and saturation adjustment layer, you had a selection
Yes.
and then you added it. One of the things that's a little bit different, or possibly a lot different than the desktop app, is by default, adjustment layers are clipped to the selected layer below,
Yes.
which in some cases is exactly what you want, but in some cases it could be jarring because you might have, I think one of my examples during one of my live streams is I had a texture added and it was like
Yeah.
a black and white texture and I had a blend mode on it. So when I was doing my adjustment layer, literally nothing was happening, at least visually.
Yeah.
What I would love to see is on the first screen, when you add an adjustment layer, you have your colors at the bottom. I would just love to see a little clipping because I know you can like apply the adjustment layer and then go into the layer properties and then clip it. But I think
Yeah.
intuitively that might be confusing. But if it's like right there after you add the adjustment layer, that might be a little bit easier to navigate.
Yeah, that's definitely feedback we've heard. And the thing I want to note is we're listening and we're trying to this is an application that we can update every month, and we are listening on what your pain points are from all types of users and understanding like how we can improve the application. So that one, I'll just show exactly what Howard's talking about. I have a layer here. I just dropped in something from Adobe stock for free, and I want to change the color of the bird. Now, what I would normally do, or what I would do here, is add a new adjustment layer, and then I would change the hue saturation, change the hue of that bird. Now you'll see here, it's only changing the bird itself. And that is because the layer is clipped, like Howard mentioned, by default. So if I go to my layer properties here, you'll see that this button here, it's already clipped. Normally, if I add an adjustment layer, it would be unclipped on desktop. It'd be unclipped and the adjustment will apply to everything. So we did this because in the testing we did with customers ahead of launch, we saw a lot of confusion about, well, I want to make whatever I just added, I masked it, now I want to make it a different color or adjust it, and I don't know how to, like, it didn't apply. It applied globally, and then you'd have to go and mask off that global layer as well, or that adjustment layer. So we did make the clipping default to make that work a little bit more successful. We have gotten feedback that it is a little cumbersome, and so we do have a plan. I think in the next maybe the next month or the month or two release, we are going to add an option that will allow you to, when you add the adjustment layer, there'll be a little option here to clip it or not clip it. And
Oh,
so
that's wonderful.
that's an example. Yeah. Example, like there's iterations we can make to this experience as we learn more. And we're going to keep doing that as we release every month.
That's awesome. And I wanted to go back a little bit in a second, but while we're on the topic of feedback, our team in particular is very connected with the community. So we're always listening to, concerns, feedback, anything,
Yeah.
everything in between, positive, negative, everything. And, often we hear, especially when it comes to not just at Adobe, but larger companies, is that, you know, X company doesn't listen. I'm not talking about X, the social
Hmm.
platform, but like company doesn't listen.
Yeah.
They don't listen to their users. And I think the reality is you guys, all the teams are listening very closely to users, but I would love for you to give a little bit of insight into what that process is, because I think a lot of people don't realize that roadmaps are often created months, if not a year ahead of time. There's
Hmm.
priorities, there's business needs, there's all sorts of different things. So feedback is absolutely important, and I know you guys are
Yeah.
working to get as much feedback as possible into the app. But what does that look
Yeah.
like internally? Like, how do you prioritize the feedback? How do you collect the feedback and then
Yeah.
ship it to customers?
Yeah, that's an important thing for us because we do build out a long-term roadmap, but we do adjust that roadmap, I would say every week. We look at what we're hearing, where we're seeing people dropping out of the application because they got frustrated, or just directly telling us what's frustrating them, or what new things they want to see, and we shift around the priorities of what we're doing based on that. There's different methods that we have to get your feedback. So, for example, this chat, we can collect the notes afterwards for sure and look through that. We've got the forums on Adobe. We do monitor social if you guys end up talking or tagging or commenting on Photoshop or Adobe's posts. We will look through that. We also look at our app reviews. There's actually a mechanism inside the app right now. If I go to this little light bulb and I go down here to feedback form, you'll be able to do feature suggestions. And so there's a lot of stuff in here. I can tell a lot of experienced Photoshop desktop users have been in here. High pass filter for being an example, but you can go in and add feature requests. You can go in and upvote things that you want to see, like GIF support, for example. And we are looking at this as well. So there's many different ways. We also will go and occasionally reach out to existing Photoshop subscribers, phone who have subscribed to like Photoshop on the iPhone, or those who have just started playing with it, and see if they want to give us feedback. We'll give them a survey to go through to tell us like where you think it worked, where you felt successful, where you felt unsuccessful. We really want to understand the whole picture of how you're using the application and what you think can be improved, as well as what you like. So we're really trying to bring in all that information. So then we'll look at that. We'll kind of aggregate all the data, all the feedback. We'll also look at like what type of customer is saying this. Is it someone who really, really knows Photoshop? Okay, great. So we need to make sure for those customers we're meeting these needs with what we're doing next. And then for people who are just picking up the Photoshop now on the phone and learning it from the start, and probably have like we really want to make sure that they feel successful quickly, like they learn Photoshop quickly, so they want to stick around and keep using Photoshop as in the years to come. Then we'll take that and say, okay, some of the things they're saying we should try to fix that a little bit sooner. And so it all weighs on, like, we've got so many things we've wanted to do. I've got a backlog being like the things that we've wanted to add into the app from Photoshop on the iPad that still exists. There's a lot of things we're still trying to bring in because Photoshop is just such a big application. There's so much power in it. There's so many functions and features that as we try to bring that all in and fit that into these devices, we have to be really specific about how we do it and like which things we bring in.
Yeah, and that has to be a massive challenge. Not just the fact that Photoshop is like on the desktop, created for the desktop, but also there are. Do you have any idea of like how many exact features are in Photoshop on desktop? It must be thousands. And bringing all of those, I would probably
Yeah.
say I can probably confidently say it's impossible to bring all the features from Photoshop on desktop to
Yeah.
to the phone or even iPad, because I would imagine there are some features in Photoshop and desktop that have been there for 20, 30, 35 years that probably one or two people use a year.
Yeah.
And it just probably doesn't make sense for your team to dedicate those resources to bring those over. And it's really interesting to see all these different feedback mechanisms, including the one I didn't even know existed, by the way, inside of the app with all those looks like Reddit in there. And that's
Yeah.
really interesting because then you can really dive in and see not just you internally, but also everyone externally, all the users can see
Yes.
where people's priorities are, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I would say like we had the similar feedback form on iPad, and the top feature request we had there was liquify. And
Oh yeah.
so it was there. It was the top request for like 2 years because we were trying to figure out how to get it to work on the iPad. And so once we got it out, we got it released on the iPad. We are very excited, and then we could tick that off on that list and say we did it. I'll note that we're working to get this on that onto the iPhone. It is Liquify. If you've used it, is a very powerful but very heavy tool on the processor, and so we're trying to get it in a way that will work on the phone without making it heat up and explode. So,
And that's another big challenge is there are a lot of GPU intensive features. You know, on the
yeah.
desktop you have a ton of power. You've got a lot more RAM typically. You have
Hmm.
dedicated GPUs, and it's a little bit easier to, you know, work those features in. Whereas a
Definitely.
phone, probably not so much.
Yeah.
So are you
Yeah.
finding that you have to completely rethink or redesign features specifically for phones aside from like moving things around?
Yeah. I think for rethinking features, yes. So for example, there's areas where we know like the application or the way that a tool works in Photoshop, even on desktop, it takes a lot of performance power, can be, and so depending on the options you make, uh, could be a little less performant. So, but we still bring them into the application because we know they're important. I'll be a big example. Probably the most upfront one is brushing. We have our brush tool here, and I'm gonna make a new layer just so I can brush on top of everything. And I can go in and choose all these different brushes that we have kind of curated to make sure that um, you have a good selection. And then you got all the different settings for brushing: smoothing, roundness, flow. And if you, I'm not going to brush on this because I'm not a big brusher. I just know that if I change a couple of these settings like smoothing, it will, even on desktop, won't be as performant. Let's see if I can show the example here. No, I can't. That means my phone is just too good, or the application is too good. But the idea is that like we know there's areas of the application that will be less performant, and we are very specific on how we bring that to the phone. If it is something that we know is just high value, you must have it, and people will kind of understand that on the phone it's going to be a little less snappy, but we'll still want it and still use it, then we will orient towards that as well. Liquify being an example, like we brought it to the iPad, and there's just so much in Liquify. If you change settings to the extreme ends, it could lag a little bit, and so but we still brought it out. So for the phone, we'll be a little more strict on that. Like we don't want it to just have a tool that you do something and it's gonna take a while before you see any result. uh, so we're working on making sure we tailor the experience to be better there. We are also, oh yeah, sorry. We are taking the opportunity to look at like, can we improve how Photoshop tools work overall? So um our big example on Photoshop on the iPad was Gaussian blur, which we're bringing to the phone. It's not there yet, but it's on the roadmap. But on the iPad, Gaussian blur on Photoshop desktop, Gaussian blur is a little box that pops up and has a little preview, and you can make your blur settings and then you commit that. And on the iPad, we made it so you just get a slider and it does it on the canvas. And that was a different way of doing Gaussian blur, a different way of doing a tool that worked better and was more performant. And so that's an example of like, we're trying to think also, how can we bring stuff to these iOS devices in a different way that works better?
That's really interesting. And it's nice to see that there's like a modernization of tools because a lot of the tools in Photoshop Desktop probably haven't changed since they originally launched.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the filters and, you know, Gaussian blur, like you mentioned. And I think for many users, they want to see something a little bit more modern. And I know we've tried in desktop as well. We've had some filters, I think, come to the canvas instead of, you're
Hmm.
kind of like built into the canvas instead of being in a separate dialogue. But it's a really interesting challenge because anytime you change something on the desktop, you're potentially disrupting workflows of someone who's been using the application for 20, 30 years, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's maybe why the contextual taskbar now exists. I know a lot of people have
Hmm.
opinions on the contextual taskbar, and my theory is that Photoshop on iPhone and the little toolbar at the bottom is just a way for Adobe to get people to like the contextual taskbar on the desktop. Um, kidding mostly. But I think, at first the contextual taskbar in Photoshop was very jarring because it was like this thing that just like it's there, it's
Yeah.
following me around, and it's always changing. But as I started to use it, I'm like, okay, well, I don't have to dig through all the menus anymore. I don't have to find
Hmm.
my adjustment panel and then add stuff there. Everything's right there, right? And you can move it, you can pin it, you can
Yep.
hide it if you don't want it. I always love when people are like, it's always in the way. Okay, move it. Just put it over there,
Yeah, I
pin
do that.
it,
I pin it
hide
to the
it.
top right.
Yeah, there. I would love for it to be docked though. I would love that, especially
Mm,
as we're adding additional tools. But I think what's really important to note is that a tool like the contextual taskbar allows the Photoshop team to modernize and change the application without disrupting people like myself who've been using Photoshop for so
yeah.
long. For newer users, the taskbar is very helpful because they don't have to dig through all these things, right? And I think that's why Photoshop on iPhone is so, one of the challenges that you guys had to overcome, and you were talking about this earlier, is contextual, what's it called, navigation, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to have all these different tools always available at the same time.
I think one thing that we were really excited about and took the challenge on was bringing this to the phone. So I'll say bringing Photoshop to the iPad, it's the same size screen as a desktop or laptop, sorry. And a lot of expectation was you could just copy paste it onto the iPad. Bring it to the phone, all bets are off. You just can't put Photoshop desktop UI onto something like a phone. So we took this as a challenge. We said, okay, great, let's blow it up. Let's just completely rethink how you would do Photoshop, still within the way that Photoshop works, but how you do the Photoshop user experience on a phone, because the expectations are going to be completely different. When you open an app on your phone, you don't expect, I hope you don't expect any app, you don't expect the desktop interface to pop up and be usable there. The screen is portrait, it's smaller, it just doesn't work that way. So we took that as a challenge. We're like, okay, great. Let's completely think, how would we want someone who doesn't know Photoshop to learn it and to use it and continually use it? How do we make sure that they feel comfortable in a mobile context and feel successful in getting what they want to do done? And so that's really where things evolved from. And it is really focused a little bit on context and a little bit on just like what's most important for a user to do once they come into the application. So I'll do a little short demo walkthrough of kind of overall the workflow you can do here. So if I've got the home screen here, but by the way, I'll note these are all cloud documents. So these all show up on web, I'll show up on desktop. All your documents will sync through and you'll be able to open up whatever you've done in desktop or web or
And
vice versa. You can, yeah.
yeah, very quickly, Ryan, because you did mention the word portrait, and I know Sean, I think in the chat, where was it? He did mention earlier. Any thoughts of holding the phone landscape rather than
Yeah.
portrait for Photoshop? Is that something that you guys are thinking about or maybe working on?
We're definitely thinking about it. I think the user experience, the UI of it is a big will be a big is a big exploration for us to understand, because if I go jump into the UI, you'll see like everything's oriented towards the bottom. When you turn your phone to the side, that changes a lot. Like, do you then expect to use both your thumbs to do things? And so we're really we want to really be able to bring this user experience on the phone to landscape in a way that makes sense. And so we're thinking about it, but right now we're also really focused on just getting more stuff into this application. Since what we've seen is most people will still hold it in portrait like 90% of the time. So, okay, so if I go in and I want to start with an image, I'll note you've got lots of different ways to start with an image and sources of images. You can use your camera roll, you can create something from stock, you can do generate an image. You also can bring in any of your photos you have in Lightroom, and I use Lightroom a lot too on my phone, and so I'm going to pick that one. I'm going to go in and pick this photo that I took back in Tokyo a few months ago. Here it is, and it will automatically open it, import it, create a new document for me. And I've got what I had in Lightroom right here to start with on Photoshop. You can also start in Lightroom and send in a photo to Photoshop as well. Um, give it a try if you want, but that's also really useful too. So, okay, now we're in the user experience. Again, like I said, everything on the bottom is workflow based, and we really want things to center around what is the thing that you want to do when you have this image, or like what do you want to explore. The thing that I really like about the phone, and you mentioned this earlier, Howard, when you're at your daughter's soccer game, you can just pull out the phone, pull out a picture, and just kind of mess around with it and play around with it. You don't have to have a specific intention. And I think that is a really fun part about editing on the phone. You don't have to know exactly what you want to do when you open a photo in this app. You, if I open a Photoshop on desktop, I have a very, like, I know exactly what I'm trying to do with it. I want to remove something. I want to change this. I have, to me, sometimes it gets a little bit more like work. In this case, I think it's a little more like fun. I'll just open this and see like, how can I mess around with it? And so I made this black and white photo, but I think I could play around with it in Photoshop in the very fun tools in Photoshop that are different than any other mobile app.
I'm going to
And
interrupt you just for a
yeah,
second because I just had a thought and I'm probably going to forget
yeah.
it. You mentioned, you open up a photo and you don't really know what to do with it, and or you
Hmm.
don't have an intention in mind. I know recently we showed off a little bit of a sneak on. We had a blog post on look like contextual actions sort of thing, right? Or AI agents. I know that's a strange word and
Mm-hmm.
weird times ahead, right?
Yeah,
But we're showing, we're kind of exploring the idea of maybe you don't know what you want to do, but here are a few things that you can potentially do. And I know in
yeah.
Lightroom, we have quick actions that are contextual, very similar. Is there any
Hmm.
thought of bringing something similar into, I know we have, a screen, when you open, you can do a few things, but
Yeah,
for those who don't know exactly what they want to do with a
yeah.
photo, are there any explorations into maybe expanding that to help them out a little bit?
Yeah, I think one thing, and I don't have, I there's a on that screen you're talking about, there's a checkbox that says "Don't show again," and I have that checked, so it won't show up here. But when I start an image, normally it will give me a pop up that says, "Do you want to remove the background? Do you want to change the background or make it a different color?" Three different options, really based around remove background. And we do want to see, like, yes, exactly that. So we do want to see what are the different get started actions that people want to do on the phone, and be able to tailor that, what we present there, to better align with what people want to do. And so we're looking into that too. We're trying to, based on what people are using the app for today, what we're seeing, that's, we have thoughts of what we want to do with that space. There's also an aspect of, you know, across the industry, there's this big push on like chatbots and how to get things to do what you want just by saying it. Like, I would love in the future for us to be able to say, look, I want to be able to change, or I want to like add color to this image, and it could tell me to do that. That's my like pie in the sky dream. But like, that's something I would love for, just in general, for Photoshop to have that wrapped in. So I know there's probably work on that somewhere, but in my head, like, that's where I see all this AI directed stuff going.
Yeah, I
But on the,
agree,
yeah,
and I think it's less about using a text prompt or a text field to generate something like production quality and then moving on
yeah,
with your life. It's more about using AI to help you or guide you throughout
yes,
the process. So if you want to, in this photo here, you might be able to use almost like a Siri type of thing to say, can you, isolate the sky, maybe change it to a sunset, and
yeah.
then maybe options to harmonize the scene might pop up and then guide you
Hmm.
from there.
Yeah, I think it's important, both to like really be able to, can't think of the word, but like be able to say, semantically say what you want to do and have that happen. But I think also to know how it happened, right? Like, you could dictate something to ChatGPT today and it'll just make it, just say do it for you, and it'll give you the output. But with Photoshop, we're really focusing on, you need to, we want you to know how it happened, because most of the people that pick up this app and stick with it want to learn the skill of Photoshop. They want to be able to say, I can use Photoshop, I can Photoshop that, and I have a deep understanding and knowledge of how the process works, of how editing works. And so we want to make sure if we do things like that, that we're able to walk through the steps or break down the steps that happened, so you can see the result. That way you can recreate it later without having to have something else do it for you. So yeah, so with this photo, there's, we are trying to wrap that idea of context and workflow into it, right? So again, the first thing we want people to do is to start with the selection, and we've got a lot of different selection tools here from Photoshop, Magic Wand, Object Select, Lasso. But the one we're really excited about is Tap Select. This one actually is new to Photoshop. That's how we brought it in here. And what it does is goes through whatever layer you're on, or if you do sample all layers, you can enable that. It'll parse through the whole image, but I only have one layer right now. but it'll go through and it'll look at all the things in the image and pick out all the things you think you might want to select. So I can go through this list of thumbnails here at the bottom, or I could actually just go on the canvas and just start tapping on things. Like, let's say I want to start selecting all these buses and do something with these buses. And if I am not able to, if it doesn't recognize everything, then I can easily go to any of my other selection tools and just start adding more to that selection. So I can just quick select here in this case. Cool. I'll do a quick pinch out and that will recenter my canvas. Now you see everything on the bottom changes. And what do I want to do with this? I could do adjustment layers. I could generative fill, maybe remove all the buses. And for what I'm showing here, I just want to show a little bit more functionality of the application. So I'm going to actually try to add a lot of color to this photo since it's black and white. And to do that, I'm going to use a fill layer, and I'll do a solid color fill. I can pick any color I want. Let's make them a little bit green. And when it does that, what it does is creates a new layer, just like this is a solid color adjustment layer on desktop. It adds the layer there. I can, if I swipe left on the layer panel, I can see my full layer stack and all the different things I want to do. So if you know Photoshop really well, you'll see these functionality are more familiar. All the layer actions you can do are within this more advanced view of layers. So if you want to get there, swipe left on your layer panel here, and you'll have access to all of that here. Okay, so I could leave this here, but I can also go to layer properties, which is going really fast. Layer properties here on the left, and I'll have all the different options I could do with this layer, whether that's changing the mask, re-editing the mask if something was missed, or do things like blend modes. And in this case, I'm going to choose a different blend mode, like multiply, to make the buses all green. And that's cool. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where I just started with the photo and just start playing with it. Like originally when I did this, I opened this photo and I just was selecting things and adding color. And that's how I ended up with the end result of what I'm hoping to show when we finish here. So I'll just do this a little bit more, add some more color. This time I'll use quick select and try to select the parking spots. I can change the options to my quick select brush here, whether that's size or the hardness of it. The same options you have on desktop. So I'll go and select this and this one. Cool, I got these parking spots. And now I'll do the same thing. I'll just add another color fill. Maybe I'll make these ones pink. And I'll see, oh, I missed a spot here. So I can go back to layer properties and I go to edit mask, and I can continue adding on to my mask. And one other thing that we're adding I'm running an early version of this app, or sorry, a new version of this app. We have a release coming in the next week where if I'm in this room with the selections right now, the way you can tell what's not selected is this checkerboard. We're adding the ability to switch through any of the different selection visualization options that you see on desktop, like selected mask. So
Oh, that
I
makes
can
me
do the,
so happy.
yes, me
Because
too.
we've passed along this feedback internally,
Yes.
and that was a little bit of a pain point because in some images,
Mhm.
if it's like a lighter image, it's very difficult to see objects. And that's a
Yeah.
thing I love about your team and many
Yeah.
other teams is that you guys are listening. Maybe you
Yes.
couldn't get this exact feature in for the initial launch, but it looks like it's coming very soon. And you guys
Yeah.
did make actually some adjustments to the checkerboard before
Yes.
launch based on feedback. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. So for black and white photos, the checkerboard is a little bit harder to use because it's a black and white checkerboard on my black and white photo. So in this case, the ruby lith is one of my favorites to use, but I can do on white. I can just do back to my classic marching ants if I really want to, but it doesn't show me the depth of my selection like a ruby lith could, or the checkerboard, black and white. But yeah, I'm gonna stick with the ruby lith here. I've got to add this part of the parking spot too, and I commit that, and great. Oops. Now I've got everything selected. I'll do my whole blend mode thing again, pick something else to make them really bright. Cool. And like for me, the power of selections and tap select is what makes this really fun. So I'll just do one more. I'll select this building here in the back, commit that, and I'll do another fill and make this, this is like, if you've been to Tokyo, this is the iconic Shibuya crossing intersection, the most busy one in the world. And this building's a little bit central to it. So I'll make that the subject of my photo. And what I think I'm making is kind of like a poster. And so I'm just going to go along with that theme. I've done a lot of things here with my base image. I've added adjustment layers and played with blend modes. There's other types of layers you can bring in too. Of course, if I go to this plus button, I've got type, I've got new layer, I've got adjustment layers. I can add any image. So I'm going to add a type layer here. Excuse me, I need some water. this type layer here, if you've been to Tokyo, this part of Tokyo is called Shibuya. So I'm gonna use that as my text. I'll move it here so you can see it. And then I can go in and do anything I want with that text. So I can go through and choose any Adobe font. All 31,000 Adobe fonts are available to me if I'm a subscriber.
I
If I'm a
expect you to
free,
scroll through all of them.
no, I've got it. I've got it tagged up here somewhere. I thought I did. There it is. I've got this font I really like here. Also, if you are using Adobe Photoshop on phone for free, then you still have a couple thousand fonts available to you for free as well. Cool. So I've got this font here. I'm going to make it much bigger so I can kind of make this into a poster. Move it over here, make it black. And then there's more advanced typography I can do with it. If I want to change the tracking, for example, of my type, I can move these letters a bit farther apart. So we are bringing like areas of the app that are more advanced and more familiar to desktop users to make sure we're not just making this an easy Photoshop, but it's still just as complex and powerful as you'd expect. So cool, I've got that. One thing I really like to do, and I've discovered this technique that I play with a lot now, is I've got this type tool with a lot of white space in the middle. So if I can go to select area, and what I want to do is fill in that area with something. I could do, another color. I could brush in with it. But in this case, I think I want to do, actually, I jumped ahead of the step I wanted to do, is make a pattern. So I'm going to go to adding an image, and I'm going to add from Adobe stock. And I showed this earlier when I added the bird, but we've got a whole collection of several 100,000 Adobe stock images available for free for anybody. And so you can go through and search through categories. You can also search for whatever you're looking for. Excuse me. But we've got our categories that we've set up for what we think people really want to use. So I'll go to halftones. I like this pattern a lot. And it will automatically license it, download it, place it on the canvas for me without me having to do anything. And it's all for free. And it's all from Adobe stock, which is great. It's a great tool to have for if I have don't know what to start with. I just need a quick image. I don't have to go out to my Google image search. I can just go straight within the app. So cool. So what I want to do is take this pattern and fit it inside the text. And I can do that by using my text layer as the basis for my selection. So I've got the text layer selected. I'll go to select area, and I'll pick magic wand in this case. So I can select all the white space. You can see I also have all the different options for magic wand if you need them. So I'll go in and I'll start tapping just the inner parts of this type layer. And that's my selection. Now I'm going to go back to the texture layer that I brought in from stock. I'm going to use that and I'm going to mask off based on my selection. And now it looks like these are all this one big, cool, filled in text object, which I like this effect. I do this a lot with my photos now. And it's something that I discovered while I was just playing with the application, how I can just make this effect. And so there's one more thing I want to do. If this is like a poster, maybe I'll put all of this text behind the building. And so I will go and in here in the more advanced view, I'm going to select both of these layers, make them a group. And then I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to take my base image and use that as my selection, as a base for my selection. So I'm going to go in back to tap select. I've got my sky here. I'm going to tap the sky, and it's got the sky selected. Oh, actually, I need to turn off sample all layers and then select the sky just on the base image. I'll go all the way back up to my top layer, and I'm going to mask. And look at that. It looks like it was behind the buildings. And so I originally came out and played with this and made this image with like an hour sitting on my couch, seeing what I can do with it. But to me, this is something I would go to desktop to do with all the advanced masking, the grouping, and all that kind of stuff, and the precision of the selections. But having this on my phone has been quite a really fun thing to do. If you look at my home screen now, you'll see I do this with lots of other images just for fun, and just see how I can make a really simple starting photo that I've taken and just add a lot of character to it. And that's my style, but there's so much more you can do with this application.
Yeah,
So
and I
we're
think
really
it's really
excited to get this out. Yeah.
yeah, and it was really interesting watching how quickly you were moving through some of those tools and techniques. And I think that's
Yeah.
so important. You can do a lot very quickly on Photoshop and iPhone. And even
Yeah.
if, I want to go back to the big question of who is this app for. But even if you're not creating something for production on your iPhone, right?
Hmm.
It's a great way to get idea on paper, so to speak. I was talking
Yeah.
earlier about creating that social graphic during my daughter's soccer practice, and it wasn't something that I was going to post on social immediately.
Hmm.
It's something that I wanted to get my ideas onto my phone. That way I can go back to my desktop or Photoshop on the web or whatever, and then continue the process. Because even though a lot of next gen users are using Photoshop on iPhone to create from scratch and
Hmm.
post to social, people like myself probably aren't, but I can still use it to very quickly get an idea out there and then continue later on.
Yeah, I'm gonna scroll through my. You can see I've done this demo a lot. I've got all my cloud docs from desktop on here too, and I'm trying to see if I have an example of something I did on desktop. Um, Started with the phone. Might be this one. Actually, I might have to download it. But I basically like I was making something for my son's birthday, and I found this image of a tree, a coconut tree that I wanted to turn into a flyer. And so and this is, I think I made this over a year ago in one of the original versions of our original prototypes of Photoshop on the iPhone. But I started with an image that I think I was just scrolling through and I saw this tree image. I liked it. So I saved it, opened it into Photoshop on the iPhone, and I started writing out the text that I wanted to put onto it and the styles I want to do with it. But the phone screen size got a little cumbersome. I'm also a millennial, so I really like to go back to my large screens for that comfort. So I did the base. I like made some of the text and the letters here. But when I wanted to do all the intricate type stuff, which by the way, you can do all this in Photoshop on the iPhone, I just felt like I wanted a bigger screen to work on it. So I went over to Photoshop Desktop, and also you can do it on Photoshop Web and be able to just finish out what I started. And that was kind of to me the value, especially as someone who uses Photoshop for quite a while and across surfaces, having it anywhere in my pocket, on my web browser, on my desktop computer, in my iPad. Like now it's everywhere, and all my documents sync, which is also really key too. It's all available to me as I go forward.
Yeah, and that's really, and I'm sure because some features from desktop are not available on. Actually, I guess that's a question. If I'm starting on the desktop and
Yeah.
I'm adding a bunch of filters, let's say I add a smart object with a
Hmm.
camera raw filter or a Gaussian blur or whatever, how does that transfer over to the iPhone?
Yeah, everything when you open a PSD here will be retained and render and work the same. So if you have a smart object, I might have an example of one here. Yes, this image. This is a smart object. You can tell because there's a little document, smart object document icon here. I can still work with this layer. So if I want to transform it, I can. If I want to move it, I can. I can't edit the contents of it. However, one fun thing is if you go to this layer view of the detail layers view, you can see I use this in Fresco too. I did everything with this image. Um, I'm gonna see if this is the type of smart object I think it would be. It's not. I'll give you an example. So I can take this Fresco layer and the type layer and the hue set. So this thing here is the letter E on the one on the canvas here. I can take these three and I can go and I can convert that to a smart object. And what it's going to do is take the things I had or a group, whatever it might be, and turn it into a smart object. So now if I go to desktop, this is a smart object. But the key part there then is if I have a smart object on my phone and I need to edit it, I have to get into it. I can go in and I can convert that back to layers here. And it'll break out that smart object into a group, give me all the things that I needed. So it's not a way of editing smart objects like you do on desktop and then being able to just have that all retained back and sent back. But if you really need to break down and work through and you're a smart object in the document and you have just your phone, that's available to you. So we are making sure that if you need to do certain operations, they're all available. Um, all of the layers, different types of layers that Photoshop has are all supported in the app because it's the same engine, it's same core code base running everything. So as we add more layers, more functionality to the application, that will also translate here. You'll also be able to open and use that here too.
That's amazing. And we just have a few minutes left. Can you possibly give us any hints, what you're allowed to say, into what might be coming maybe in the next update or in the future? And any final words about Photoshop on iPhone you'd love to throw out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I already showed you guys the thing I'm most important excited about in the next update is that change in selection checkerboard. Um, it's going to be right here, this little icon here. If you are ever not clear what these icons are, because they're meant to be like really quick actions or quick high value actions that you want to do fast, you can tap this. It'll show you exactly what those things are. So selection preview, being able to change that, that's the biggest thing that I'm excited to come out with. We are still adding more functionality. We have more adjustment layer types like gradient layers coming in. We're working on liquify. So we want to make sure the functionality is more robust. The focus for us too is also just the issue you brought up earlier for you, Howard, about automatically clipping layers and adjusting to customer feedback and making a change to it so that, okay, well, if that specific part of the UI isn't working, let's tweak it so it works better. We're going to continue doing that as these releases come out every month. So the application itself will look and work the same, but you'll see little changes that'll hopefully make your life a little bit easier as you continue to work with the application. The other thing too is just we know that we've really oriented this to get people who don't know Photoshop to learn it and to use it. But we know, I'm going to say, maybe not a majority, but a lot of our users coming in are going to be like you and I who know Photoshop really well. So getting good features in, getting all that real like powerful Photoshop functionality in is still going to be important. All the new stuff we're thinking about at Adobe. So getting back a year or two ago, getting Gen Fill into the application, that was top of mind for us. So we also want to stay on the cutting edge of what Photoshop does, as well as bringing in all the classic stuff that is important for Photoshop users.
Absolutely. And I loved all these insights. And, if anyone's watching, go download Photoshop on iPhone. It is free, which is incredible. And
Yeah.
Sean's saying we got no boops today. Boop. And with that, we're going to wrap things up. I want to give a big thank you to Ryan for joining us and Paco for running things behind the scenes. And we will see you all very soon.
Thank you.